Hi, and welcome back to session 4.2. So session 2 on chapter 4. In this session, we're going to be doing some shadows and some gradients. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is drop shadows. With a drop shadow, you've probably seen them in text effects where it just shows a shadow of the same letters as it goes under it. And I have a couple of examples here of drop shadows just to show you the different ways that you can design them. With a drop shadow, first off, we call it a text shadow as opposed to a box shadow. We'll talk about those in a second. So a text shadow, and you give it a color, and then you give it its offset. How far do you want to go off of your X and Y direction? So your horizontal and vertical direction in pixels. And then the last number that you're going to do, so there are 3 numbers, offset X, offset Y, and then your blur. How far do you want to go? How much do you want to spread that shadow? So we're going to go up, we're going to go over, and then we're going to spread. And you can choose to set your offsets into positive or negative numbers, depending on what direction you want the shadow to go into. If you do a 0 for your blur, it's going to make a really hard edge on that shadow as opposed to the blur being much more spread out. You can also create multiple shadows if you want to, just to cause a little bit different effects. So there's different examples down here of background colors and different text shadows like this book that'll show you different ways that you can do your shadows and how you can use different colors and multiple shadows all at the same time. The first thing that we're going to do is add a drop shadow or a text shadow to our article header name, our Komosutu family. So we are going to go back to our visual 1 where I still am because that's where we left off. And we're going to go to the article section here where we have our background, and we're going to add in a text shadow. So article, and we're going to do specifically a header and an H1. So we want it to be just the H1 that we're going to deal with here. And we're going to call it text shadow. We're going to do a 1-line shadow here, but we are going to do an RGB with 181, 211, 181. So it's kind of a lighter green. And we're going to go at 2 pixels for our horizontal offset and 2 pixels for our vertical offset, and then 1 pixel for our blur. Then we're going to add a second one. So let's see first off what that looks like. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. So we added in this kind of, it's a little harder to see, but it's the little lighter one. Now we're going to add a second one because you can have 2 of them. And we're going to do an RGBA. And this is in the case that the browser is not able to see the second one. It'll still have at least something there. So we're going to do a 21, 21, 21 with a 66. And then we're going to do, again, a 5 pixel for our horizontal and a 5 pixel for our vertical and a 25 pixel for our blur. I'm sorry, that was not, we're actually going to do these 2 either way because having the 2 of them together are going to cause both the green and then it'll cause kind of a darker. And we're just going to stop there because Cheryl isn't doing anything right. Comma, there's no comma. Crap. Yes. There we go. So you can see now that we have kind of this really light, opaque gray shadow in the background, and we still have that light green. So we were able to have both of these together, this gray here and then the green for our drop shadow, our text shadow. Next, we're going to do our box shadows. Now, our text shadows are going to be following the letters, whereas our box shadows are going to be around a element box, so the element itself. So you can choose to set your box shadows inset or outset. You can choose the different colors, and again, they follow that color, offset X, offset Y, and then how much is their blur. So box shadows can apply to any block element, any element that you have that's a block element, and otherwise it looks similar to a drop shadow. If you want to apply a shadow to both the left and the right side, you need to apply two shadows. So it needs to be first a left side being an offset of negative, like in this case, a positive 15 and a negative 15 will cause it on two different sides. Let's go watch that in code. The next thing we're going to add is a box shadow, and we are going to add this box shadow to the entire page. So we're going to go to the body element, which is going to be body. Here it is. So our page body here. We already have our borders, our left and our right, the black borders that we put in. Now we're going to add a box shadow. We're going to do a one-line box shadow, and we're going to have two sides to it because we're going to have the left side and the right side. So I'm going to make an RGB that is going to be 51, 51, 51. Again, that gray color that we just did. But we are going to put it at 15 pixels off the edge positive, and then we're going to do a 15 pixel negative as well. We're going to do a 0 pixel and then a 25 pixel for the blur. Then we're going to comma, and we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. C, B. There it goes, and let's get rid of that comma I accidentally put in. So we're going to do on the positive side and the negative side. It's going to create this shadow that goes down the positive side and the negative side. So if I did not have this first entry here, not that one. So let's do this, the second entry. And we put a semicolon at the end of this one instead of the comma. You would see that we'd only have this right-hand side one, but we wouldn't have the left because it's 15 pixels off the edge of it positive this side. When we did negative 15, it goes off the other side. So that is our drop shadows on our page body. The next one we're going to do is an inset shadow. So we have these two on the outset. So those are the two that we just did with our box shadow. Now we're going to do an inset shadow on just our article. So this is our article here, and we're going to have an inset shadow, which means a shadow on the inside as opposed to a box shadow, which goes on the outside. So we're going to go down to our article, which is actually up, sorry. So here's our background, and underneath our background, we're going to do a box shadow. And in this case, we're going to call it inset before we start. And then we're going to do the RGB with, this case, it's going to be 71, 71, 71, which is still a gray. It's just a little lighter gray as opposed to a little darker gray. And we're only going to go in 10. So we're going to do a negative 10 pixels, negative 10 pixels, and a 25 pixel blur. And then we're going to do the same thing, inset with an RGB of 71, 71, 71. And we're going to do we're going to do a positive 10 pixels and a positive 10 pixels. And then again, our 25 pixels here. And you'll see it created this shadow. And you can see it ran it all the way, top, bottom, left, and right. So we called them both inset, so it knows it's inside of it. And where did we want to start? Where did we want to end? How did we want to do that with our negative 10 and our positive 10? So you can see how those insets work on the inside shadowing, just to give you that box shadow there. The final one we're going to add is on our family links section. We're going to go ahead and add a box shadow to the aside. Now, when you're doing your site, you may not want to add this much extraneous things. But since we're kind of testing you to show you all the different ways to do it, it's okay to go ahead and do it in this case. You just might want to be careful when you are in the real world about how much of this you do. Sometimes too much is not a good thing. So we're going to do and 0.4 for our RGBA. That's again going to be a green. We're going to do a 0 pixel and 0 pixel in the horizontal and vertical position. Then we're going to do a 20 pixel blur and a 10 pixel saying that it's going to be taller and wider than the object. So 10 pixels all the way to the outside. And you can see how we've done this kind of shadow around the outside of our family links. So it's kind of a halo around our side, which is kind of nice since everything else kind of has a little halo here and a little halo over here. Everything kind of works together. Our next example is going to be applying a color gradient. So gradients are where we start at one color and we move our way into another color. We blend into it. First off, you can apply a direction for your gradient. They don't always have to be horizontal or vertical. You can have them in any 360 degree where 0 is the top, 90 is the right, we go clockwise around, or you can always give them a name to the top left, to the bottom, and to the bottom, etc. The color can be either RGB or RGBA depending on if you want to add a transparency. Remember that A adds that opacity, which always adds in that transparency, making things look just a little different. And you can also apply a percentage at the end. So if you ever see a gradient with a third number or a third piece with a number at the end, the percentage at the end is where do you want it to stop? You want the idea to either start at a number and then move its way through, or where do you want it to end? So in this case, the percentage is going to tell you where you want it to end. We're assuming that you started where the last one left off. So these are going to be our gradients. We have both linear and radial. So we'll start with our linear, move on to our radial. So I think gradients are really pretty and I like them a lot. So I'm really glad that they added one in here to the footer so that we could see how that gradient works there. In our footer, instead of just that green background that we have now, and there's a little bit more, I just need to scroll down a little bit. We are going to say for our footer, we want to add a background. And in this case, our background is going to be a linear gradient. And we're going to do 345 degrees. And we're going to start from RGB 172, 232, and 172, which is a green. Doesn't surprise you. We've been doing a lot of green in this thing. So we're going to start from there. We're going to use a comma. We're going to come over here. I don't know why that. Oh, sorry, I must have accidentally bumped off my scrolling. And then we're going to go to RGB 21, 35, 21, which is a really dark green. And we're going to do it at 80%. Semicolon. And you can see, so we started from here at 345 degrees and we're kind of going this way. Remember the degrees for gradient, 0 is straight up. So we're going over in this direction as opposed to going straight up. So it's kind of going in this 345 degree angle here from this light green here to this dark green over here. So that's really kind of pretty. With our radial gradients, they're similar in that you have a position and a color stop. They start from the center and move their way out, and you can choose between an ellipse and a circle. If you do not want to do a equal circle, you can choose an ellipse with a left and or with a position that includes both a horizontal and a vertical number. Your sizing can be a percentage or a pixel or one of the keywords, starting from the farthest corner, the farthest side, the closest corner, the closest side. How do you want to move? With our radial gradients, we give it what shape are we doing, what size are we going to pick, and at what position. Then we tell it all of our individual color stops and include in that color stop the percentage where you want it to stop. So let's go look at this in code and see how this applies. The next gradient we're going to add is going to be a gradient around our family links here. So inside of our aside element. So we've already done our box shadow, but now we're going to be adding a background. Sometimes you'll wonder why I'm doing things on the top or the bottom. Sometimes it's just alphabetical. I actually like things being alphabetical in order, and it looks like the book follows that as well. So I like to do alphabetical so I can easily find where the thing is going to be if I keep them in alphabetical order. In this case, I'm going to do a radial gradient. I'm going to start from white Then I'm going to go to RGB 151, 222, 151, which is that kind of medium green. And then I'm going to end with RGB 81, 125, whoops, and 81, which is a little bit darker. So with a radial gradient, it's going to start from white, it's going to go out to this medium, and then it's going to end up with the dark on the outside. It's kind of a neat little center of the gradient with 3 different colors in there. Finally, we can create a semi-transparent object, or an object that is kind of transparent. You can kind of see through it, but otherwise it's kind of still there, by setting the opacity figure of an object to somewhere between 0 and 1. 0 is what we call completely transparent, and 1 is completely opaque or totally solid, the way you would expect it to be if you didn't add any opacity. The last code that we're going to do in this session is going to be the opacity of our first image. So everything else in this page feels a little shadowed or a little opaque, and we're going to do the same thing with this image right in the middle here. So we are going to come back to our CSS and we're going to go to our figure. In our figure right here, we have our border style, we have our margins, and we're going to go ahead and add our opacity. And in this case, we're going to set an opacity of 0.55. Remember, opacity is always a number between 0 and 1. You cannot have an opacity that is more than 1. And when I hit refresh, oops, I added an S in there. There we go. When I hit refresh here, you'll see it just shaded it out just a little bit. Everything on this page is just a little shaded. So that's just the little difference we made with opacity on that main page. All right, so that is chapter 4, session 2. Hopefully that it gave you a little bit about shadows and gradients, and then we'll see you back at section 3.